Imagine living in a world where every sip of water could kill you, where rivers glittered in the sun, yet carried the waste of 1,000 homes, where people prayed before drinking from a pond, not out of faith alone, but out of fear. In the Middle Ages, clean water wasn't a guarantee. It was a miracle. And yet, without modern science, filters or plumbing, ordinary people found brilliant, desperate ways to turn filthy ponds and murky streams into something drinkable. Tonight, we'll step back into that quiet, uncertain world to learn how monks engineered secret water systems, how villagers brewed safety into beer, and how entire communities survived on ingenuity and faith alone. This is the forgotten story of how medieval people turned dirty water into life itself. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let's drift into the stillness of history. In the calm quiet of a medieval morning, long before the sound of metal pipes or the soft hum of kitchen faucets, water was not a simple convenience. It was a question of life or death, a daily uncertainty that shaped the rhythm of every village, monastery, and castle across Europe. To the modern mind, it seems unimaginable, a world where a sip of water could carry disease, where rivers ran foul, and where rain barrels were both a blessing and a breeding ground. Yet for the people of the Middle Ages, water was both their greatest need and their most unpredictable enemy. Imagine a small village in the English countryside in the 14th century. The fields are pale with the dry whisper of summer heat. The villagers rise before dawn, farmers, wives, shepherds, all bound by one shared routine, the search for drinkable water. A narrow dirt path leads from the thatched cottages to a shallow stream that winds sluggishly through the valley. Its surface glimmers gold in the early light, but the shimmer is deceptive. A few cows drink from the same stream a mile upstream, and the runoff from nearby fields, heavy with waste and ash, mixes invisibly with the flow. The villagers know this. They've seen sickness spread after drinking too soon after the floods. Still, they come, because there is no other choice. A woman kneels by the water, dipping her clay jug slowly, careful not to disturb the mud beneath. The stream smells faintly metallic. She whispers a short prayer, not because she expects the water to be pure, but because faith offers comfort where knowledge does not. For generations, people like her had developed countless small rituals around water. Blessings, charms, and small offerings to local saints. These acts were not superstition alone. They were gestures of respect toward something as powerful and unpredictable as water itself. In larger towns, things were more complicated. Cities like London, Paris, and Florence relied on rivers for almost everything: drinking, washing, dyeing cloth, cleaning hides, and emptying waste. The same Thames that sparkled with sunlight also carried the refuse of thousands. But necessity breeds ingenuity. Across medieval Europe, people learned to make water drinkable, or at least survivable, in ways that seem both simple and ingenious today. One of the most common methods was boiling. It was understood, even without the science of bacteria, that boiled water sat better in the stomach. The process of brewing ale, for example, became not only a cultural habit, but a survival strategy. Weak ale, often called small beer, contained little alcohol but had been boiled during brewing, making it far safer to drink than raw water. Even children drank it daily. A family might brew a small barrel every few days, using a mixture of barley, oats, or whatever grains survived the season. The result was cloudy, warm, and mildly sour, but it kept people alive. Monasteries were centers of such practical wisdom. Monks, bound by routine and cleanliness, often led the way in understanding how to manage water safely. Within stone cloisters, aqueducts and channels brought fresh water from springs in the hills. Monks built settling tanks where sediment could rest at the bottom before the water flowed onward to washrooms or refectories. Some monasteries, like those of the Cistercians, became known for their mastery of hydraulic engineering. They diverted streams, built small dams, and created artificial ponds that doubled as fish farms and reservoirs. In their quiet devotion, they created systems that mirrored modern sanitation, though they would have described it only as discipline and order in service of God. But outside monastery walls, water remained an uncertain gift. In poorer hamlets, people learned to use nature's filters. They collected rainwater from roofs, storing it in barrels lined with charcoal or sand. They dug shallow wells and lined them with stone to prevent collapse. In some places, peasants dropped hot stones into their jugs to mimic boiling. When famine or drought struck, they turned to even more desperate measures, squeezing moisture from roots, collecting morning dew in cloths, or digging pits where groundwater seeped slowly to the surface in the towns. There were professional water carriers, men and women who hauled buckets from wells or rivers to sell on the streets. Their shoulders bore the scars of wooden yokes, and their days were spent walking the same paths from sunrise to dusk. A good water carrier knew which wells drew the cleanest water and which should be avoided after heavy rains. In cities like Paris, the wealthy might pay extra for spring water brought in from the countryside, an early form of luxury trade in something as simple as a drink. And then there were the wells themselves, silent guardians of life and danger. Digging a well was no small feat. It required skill, wood, stone, and prayer. A poorly placed well could strike tainted groundwater or collapse under its own weight. In some villages, digging began with ceremony. A priest would bless the ground, and offerings might be left for good fortune. Wells often became community centers, surrounded by gossip, trade, and ritual. Yet they could also become sources of disease when animals fell in, or when floodwaters seeped in from nearby latrines. The line between safety and sickness was thin and often invisible. The great irony of medieval life was that water, the simplest element, demanded constant work. People scrubbed it and strained it through linen cloth, poured it through crushed charcoal, or mixed it with vinegar or herbs to disguise the taste. Many preferred to drink diluted wine or ale for safety. Children were raised on small beer. Soldiers marched with kegs of mead or weak cider. And travelers, wary of strange water, relied on fermented drinks or melted snow. The body adapted, and so did custom. Clean water, as we know it now, was a luxury almost no one expected in times of crisis. When drought or war cut off access to fresh supplies, the struggle turned grim. Chronicles from the 12th and 13th centuries speak of villages where wells ran dry, forcing people to scrape at muddy pits for a few drops of moisture. During long sieges, soldiers collected rainwater from rooftops or boiled leather straps for broth. Chronicles tell of the summer without rain, when men in France drank from puddles that shimmered with insects. In the harshest winters, ice became both an enemy and a resource. People chipped it from frozen rivers and melted it over coals, thankful for even a mouthful of lukewarm water. And yet, through all these hardships, communities adapted with remarkable creativity. Medieval people understood the landscape in ways modern people rarely do. They knew which moss indicated clean springs, where willow roots hid moisture, and how to follow animal tracks to hidden water sources. In Ireland and Wales, holy wells were revered, not only for their supposed healing powers, but because they marked the few places where water ran clear and constant. Pilgrims would walk miles to these wells, leaving offerings of ribbons or coins. Both in faith and gratitude, the knowledge of water was passed down quietly, generation to generation. Mothers taught daughters how to gather dew for washing wounds. Fathers taught sons how to dig a well away from waste pits. In monasteries, scribes recorded the properties of herbs that could sweeten bad water, rosemary, mint, and thyme among them. Travelers wrote of strange techniques seen abroad. In the deserts of North Africa, cloth filters made from camel hair. In Eastern Europe, ice left to melt in the sun, the first drops discarded as impure. Across the known world, people found ways to endure thirst. The medieval approach to water was not merely practical, it was spiritual. Water was seen as a living force, a gift tied to divine will. Droughts were read as signs of punishment or neglect of duty. Floods as cleansing wrath. Priests blessed rivers during feast days. Processions were held to pray for rain. In many towns, fountains were adorned with statues of saints who were believed to protect the flow. Water was woven into daily prayers, art, and architecture, from the holy water stoops at church doors to the baptismal fonts carved with biblical scenes. But beneath the reverence was constant caution. People had seen what happened when rivers turned foul, how whole communities could fall, ill after spring floods washed waste into the wells. The great plagues of the later Middle Ages only deepened that fear. During outbreaks, some cities ordered wells sealed or guarded. Others brought in water from distant springs through wooden pipes. Primitive, but effective public works that hinted at the beginnings of sanitation. In time, the wealthiest households began experimenting with their own filtration methods. Sand, charcoal, and even cloth sacks filled with crushed shells were used to strain water. In castles, rainwater was collected in cisterns beneath the courtyard. Those stagnant pools often bred insects. Still, compared to the peasant drawing from a muddy pond, it was a luxury. The human relationship with water during the Middle Ages was not one of mastery, but negotiation. It required patience, labor, and faith. Every drop had to be earned, drawn, filtered, blessed, or boiled. And yet, from this daily struggle grew traditions that endured for centuries. The brewing of beer, the reverence for holy wells, the careful placement of wells at the center of towns, all of it was born from necessity. If you walked through a medieval village at dusk, you might hear the creak of buckets and the murmur of voices around the well. The day's work was done, and families carried their jugs home, the cool weight of water sloshing inside. Fires burned in hearths, and small pots of broth simmered, a thin stew of roots and herbs made safe by boiling. Children might sip weak ale before bed, unaware that the act of drinking itself connected them to a long chain of survival stretching back generations. Even in its most ordinary form, water told a story of fear, of invention, of quiet endurance. The people of the Middle Ages lived by its rhythm, never certain when it might vanish or turn against them. Yet, through faith and persistence, they learned how to transform filth into sustenance, danger into daily life, and perhaps that is what makes their history so quietly powerful. Not the grand battles or kings, but the small, unseen triumphs, the peasant who found a spring under a fallen oak, the monk who learned to filter stream water through sand, the mother who boiled rainwater for her children. They turned necessity into ritual and hardship into resilience. In the stillness of that distant world, surrounded by mist and stone, they lived by the humblest truth, that survival was not found in plenty, but in patience. And every sip of water, no matter how murky, was a quiet victory against the uncertainty of life itself. If you've made it this far, thank you for sharing this quiet journey through history with me. Here at Quiet Boring Sleep, we explore the calm corners of the past, the forgotten details, the slow stories, and the gentle rhythms of human life that shape the world we live in. If you enjoyed drifting through this sleepy piece of history, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and maybe even leave a comment about what time in history you'd like to fall asleep to next. Your support helps keep these peaceful stories alive, one quiet night, and one boring bit of history at a time. Good night. And thank you for listening.